You, Glenn, for all you do. Everybody does service. Hi, everybody. I am an alcoholic, and my name is Carol, and I'm honored and grateful to be here. And thank you for having me share. I love it. The gifts of sobriety, right? Oh, I love our book of Alcoholics Anonymous. On page 470 in the story Promoted to Chronic, there's a line. It says, "And AA took this wreck of a woman and brought her back to life." And it goes on on 394 in A Flower of the South, it says, "AA's changed not simply one department of my life, it's changed my whole life. It's a fellowship with God and man that has held good wherever I've turned and whatever I've done. It is a way of life that pays as it goes every step of the way, in compensations that have been wonderfully rich and rewarding, and it has made life 1,000 times easier and simpler than did the endless compromises and conflicts by which I lived before. It pays daily in more harmonious relations with my fellow man, clearer insight to the true meaning of life, answering love and gratitude wherever and whenever I have been an instrument of God's will in the life of others." And it goes on, and in another part it says, "AA is not a plan for recovery that can be finished and done with. It's a way of life. And the challenge, I love some of the words that Bill uses. The challenge contained in its principle is great enough to keep anybody striving for as long as he lives." And it says, "I can't outgrow this program." And that really is great too, to know I never graduate. I was given the gift of sobriety May 1st, 1988 at the Glass House Group in Fort Worth, Texas. I haven't had a drink in 13,387 days. So that's 36 years, 7 months, and 24 days, one at a time. And welcome, Ben, to Alcoholics Anonymous. When I got sober, they didn't use the word relapse. They used the word slip, which means sobriety lost its priority. And I've kept my sobriety as a priority. When I was new, one of the things my first sponsor, Lois, had me do every day was to write a gratitude list. And when I started moving sobriety and God down farther on my list, I kept going to meetings where people were having slips and going back and drinking. So God and sobriety are always the first two things on my list. And she had me write a list of things I did to help my self-esteem, because when I came to you, I didn't have self-esteem. I didn't have self-respect. I didn't have dignity anymore. See, when I drank, I did things I wouldn't have done, and I put myself in situations I wouldn't have put myself in. And I started drinking at 18. I got sober at 37 and a half. I'm 74 now. And drinking was fun for a while. In 18, it was fun. We'd drink and party, and I'd go out to the honky tonks and the bars, and I would drink and dance because I couldn't do it without the alcohol. But then my drinking progressed, and in my early 20s, I went through a really bad divorce. It was very abusive and got stalked and felt like a failure, and my drinking got a lot worse. And when I was 29, I moved from New Jersey to Fort Worth, Texas, and my drinking got a lot worse. I was drinking in the stockyards at the saloons and the honky tonks. And then what happened is it kept getting worse and worse, and alcohol wasn't working the same. And I got to where at the end of my drink in the last several years, I drank at home in my apartment. I went to work every day. I showed up. I didn't get a DUI. I didn't go to jail. I didn't lose jobs. I paid my bills. So that kept me thinking I'm not an alcoholic. I didn't drink all day. I'd look at the bottle in the morning, and I'd wait till I got home, because I knew if I started in the morning, I didn't know what was going to happen. Because I drank and drove in blackouts. I did all kinds of embarrassing stuff. So I waited till I got home from work. And so at the last several years, my drinking was going to work, coming home, and drinking. And it became my prison, you know? And so that's what happened to me. And so I got here, and I didn't like me, and I didn't feel good about myself, and I didn't know how to live life on life's terms. And even when I was a kid, I heard somebody read their story the other morning, and it's in the big book. And he said when he was 10 years old, how he just would run away from home, and he never felt like he fit in anywhere. And that was me. But he shared he took a backpack and drinks and Pop-Tart. I just ran away and climbed a tree. And after a few times, my family just figured I'd show back up at some point, and they didn't even look for me anymore. And I forgot about that. when people share their story. Like I couldn't remember when I got sober when my first drink was. I kept trying to put pieces together and it wasn't fitting. And then one day I heard a lady share, I was really new, probably my first few weeks of sobriety. And she shared that she started drinking in New York City, and her first drink was a martini. And I remembered that was my first drink. I started working in New York City 3 months before my 18th birthday. And on my 18th birthday, the guys at work took me out for lunch and they drank martinis, and that's what they ordered for me. And it was terrible. I couldn't drink it. So they got a blackberry sour. See, I drank for the effect. I didn't always like what I drank, but I learned to drink it. And when I changed boyfriends, I learned to drink what they drank because I wanted the effect, right? If I got thrown up sick drunk on something, I didn't drink that again because that was the problem. It wasn't alcohol, it was whatever that was, right? And I thought the other day I had a friend, she used to drink martinis and stuff with gin, and she would empty the liquid out of the olive bottle and pour vodka or gin in it and soak her olives. And, you know, I didn't get to that. See, I kept finding differences. And when I came here, you said, look for the similarities. And so when you shared how you felt and the things that happened and the things you did when you drank, I identified. And every time I went to the meeting and they said, does anybody have a desire to stop drinking and try this way of life for 24 hours? I finally did. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And every time we read the preamble, it says there are no dues or fees for a membership. I paid high dues and fees. I paid with my dignity, my self-esteem, my self-respect. And thankfully, I don't do that anymore. And so, I didn't get a DUI. I kept saying, I don't have a problem. I can still drink. I can still handle this. And it got to where I couldn't. When I got here and I looked back at my life and I looked back at when I drank, the things I did and things that happened to me, I know my life was unmanageable. And, it's funny because I guess it was a couple months before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. They had a stress test on TV and there was 30 questions. And I remember laying in bed watching that show, and it's like if you had 0 to 5, you weren't stressed, and it went up. And if you had 25 to 30, you're really stressed. And I scored a 27, and I had no idea what was wrong with my life until I came to you. And so I got to Alcoholics Anonymous through a boyfriend's blackout, and I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and somebody greeted me and gave me a hug, and I sat in the back of the room and I listened to the speakers for a couple weeks because they had a speaker. My first meeting was a Thursday and they had a step study, and somebody was sharing their story going through some of the steps. And I went, I did that, and that happened to me too. And the Friday night was a speaker and the Saturday night was a speaker. And I kept saying, I did that and I did that. And I kind of came in through Al-Anon, but my first 3 meetings were open AA meetings. And so I was sitting there and I was telling the Al-Anon lady, I said, when I go to the liquor store, I always buy extra and I hide some in the closet because the boyfriend will drink all my liquor and then I won't have some. So I hide it in the closet she said she doesn't hide it for her, that maybe I need to look at my problem with drinking and read the big book for me and see if I identify with it. And I did. There's lots of places. I drank for the effect. I changed what I drank. I was restless, irritable, and discontent. And it says alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. But what I've learned is so is recovery, and it's contagious, and I wanted it. I wanted to be able to look you in the eye. I wanted to be able to laugh at life because I was always so serious. I grew up really young at the age of 10 because of life stuff that happened in my family. I was working full-time in New York City 3 months before my 18th birthday. I didn't go to college. But you know what happened? All that responsibility probably kept me from doing worse stuff than I did. So I guess I'm grateful for that responsibility. But the other side of it is that I didn't know how to be a kid. And thankfully, when I got my first sponsor, Lois, she taught me things on how to be a kid because I was so serious. And so I started in right away, going to meetings. I was going to 2-3 meetings a day for 3 months or so. And I learned, they told me to make coffee and set up chairs and look for people more scared than me and greet people. And do all those things. And they told me for every pot of coffee, for every chair I set up, and every person I greeted, I'd get a day of sobriety. And I think that's how I got my first year. And they told me to look for women more scared than me. And when I sat in the very back row in the back corner, they said, sit up front and ask to be a part of and not apart from. And I had to pray that prayer because I would isolate, right? I go to the meeting during the day or after work. I mean, because there was one down the street from my office. And then the first few weeks I would stay at home on the weekend, and then I would get lonely. And what happens when I get lonely? Then I'm going to want to drink again. So I had to sit up front, and then I had to get women's phone numbers and call women and read the literature. And meetings alone don't keep me sober. I had to learn to be of service. And there's lots of ways to do that. And I was at one of the meetings early on, and they said a woman needs a meeting to her house. And I got her number, and she changed my life. Her name was Lois, and Lois had been a smoker. And after years of smoking, she got emphysema, and the last 7 years of her life, she was confined to bed with a third of a lung on oxygen. She couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't really sit up, and she became my first sponsor. She was 22 years sober. She got sober June 17th, 1966. And she got me through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous right away. And she taught me about the steps and the traditions. She didn't teach me about my concepts, but my group did, because they did all 3 legacies. But I sat with Lois on her bed a lot. And I did go to meetings in person, but sometimes my meetings were sitting on her bed. And she was a firm believer, like Dr. Bob, keep it simple, get through the steps, don't dilly-dally around, just do it. And so she taught me about prayer, because when I got to you, my only prayer was, God, get me out of this. I won't do it again. Or God, don't let this happen. I didn't know how to pray other than that. I thought I had a hateful, punishing God. And one day somebody said, hold my hands out, like in front of me. And they kept stacking books on it. Like, how much can I hold before I hand it over to a higher power? Because I thought I could control everything. I thought I knew what was best for everybody. I thought I couldn't ask for help because it's a sign of weakness. I didn't have people I could trust and rely on growing up, not even my parents. And so I thought I had to be self-supporting and self-sufficient. And, everything I have because I've worked for it. Nobody gave me anything. I started working at 18. I got my first car. I was 21. I bought it and paid for it and got my own insurance. And so I had to go through life. And then I come to you, and I didn't want to ask for help. I thought it was a sign of weakness. And what Lois taught me is, Carol, what does it feel like to do for other people? And I said, it feels good. I like it. And she said, if I don't let other people help me, I'm depriving them of that feeling of helping somebody. And that maybe you're praying, how can you be of service and how can you be helpful? And me asking you, is God filling your prayer? And that's helped me a bit. It's still hard to ask for help. But when I sat on Lois's bed the first couple of days I met her, we talked about my drinking, because I wasn't positive I was an alcoholic. I told you I didn't drink all day, every day. I didn't get a DUI. I didn't go to jail. I thought you had to do those things to be declared an alcoholic. And she said, Carol, if you weren't drinking, would you have done the things you did and put yourself in those situations? And I wouldn't have. And I knew I had insane thoughts because I thought about suicide. I remember I was about 9 years old, and I remember telling my mom I wanted to kill myself, right? 9 years old. I think about that. And Mom didn't say why. Mom said, don't think like that, don't talk like that. So I could never tell anybody some of those things. And I had to keep it a secret till I got to you. I knew I had no trouble with that second step. I heard a new definition of insanity a few years ago. It's having the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and not living it and applying it to my life. And then I had to do a third step, and I said, but I have a hateful, punishing God. And she said, no, you can have any God you want. Create your own higher power. My book of Alcoholics Anonymous says God's either everything or nothing. What do I want God to be? I want God to be everything. And so I would listen to you, and I would talk to the people at my home group and other groups, and I would listen to them, and I would hear them talk about their higher power. And some of the things I tried, and some of them worked and some of them didn't work for me. But like I tried once to get on my knees, and that doesn't work for me. I don't do that because I've learned God hears me even if I don't say something out loud and I just think it. And my higher power would rather I pray and doesn't care how, just that I do. And I don't question it anymore. And um, I created this higher power for me. I hear people say God's their father and their best friend, and that didn't work for me either, because Lois taught me people are human and they're not always going to be there for me. She died when I had a year sober. I've had a few die, so she taught me not to put people on pedestals. And so my higher power is not my friend, because there's times like now, if somebody called me, I am not available. I don't want a higher power that's not available to me. I want one that's 24/7. And I can't have God be my parent, because my parents lied to me and they didn't keep what promises. And so I didn't want that kind of a vision either for me. And so I have this gender neutral higher power, and God has not changed. And I can say the word God now that I couldn't when I came to you. And my God hasn't changed, but because of life experiences I've had, and seeing some of the things that happen in your life, then I keep getting to see how big God is. God keeps showing me how big God is. I remember, I think it was my first year sober. I was 4 months sober, and I went to a conference in Oklahoma. And this lady shared that her drinking took her to be a hooker on Skid Row in the Bowery in California. But when she came to talk to us, she said she left as the head nurse of the surgical transplant team at UCLA. Alcoholics Anonymous can do amazing things in our lives. And, that was a really powerful example for me. And at that same conference, I had lots of things like I got unconditional love from people when I would share something about fear of something I was afraid to do. And I didn't know how to deal with unconditional love you gave me. I cried a whole lot my first few months of sobriety, probably my first year of sobriety. At that conference I went to, they said, does anybody have a topic? And I shared about fear. And I didn't think I was afraid when I came to you, but I realized how much fear I had. And then I met people from Dallas, and they said, come to Dallas to our meetings. And I said, I don't drive to Dallas. I hear it on the traffic report in the morning. It's bumper to bumper traffic a lot every morning. And I didn't want to do that. And you know what happened? We had cassette tapes when I got sober. And so I bought cassette tapes of that conference, and I was listening to the recordings, and it was Labor Day weekend. I was driving home Labor Day Monday with a lot of traffic. And I was just watching the car in front of me so I wouldn't hit it. And I didn't realize that the interstate forked off to go to Fort Worth. And I was just going straight watching the car in front of me. And I looked up and I saw signs I recognized from the traffic report, like Mockingbird Lane and Stemmons Freeway. And I was in downtown Dallas driving in traffic, and I didn't even know I was doing it. It was God saying, Carol, you can do what you don't think you can do. Just do what's right in front of you. That's all you have to do. And I'll take care of the rest. And that's been my experience. I just do what was right in front of me. And it's not the next right thing. It's the next indicator. It's the next thing I think I need to do according to after I check my motives. And I learn lessons. I say, okay, God, however this goes, I get a lesson and an experience to grow through to share with somebody else someday. I also don't invite God into my small, limited human day anymore like I did when I was new, because I heard people do that. Now I invite myself into God's day, because anything is possible in God's day. And my higher power is so powerful. I live in South Florida now. We've had some Cat 5 hurricanes I've lived through. I don't know anybody can do that. I woke up during the night, and thankfully God woke me up, and I got to close my windows because it was raining in right where I keep my big books and stuff. And, it could have not worked out the way it did, that I caught the rain so it didn't ruin my books. But my higher power can make it go from day to night and put stars out and the moon changes. And so mine is just gender neutral. Maybe nature, I don't know. I don't question it. It's some force that is bigger than me. And that's all I need to know. And it has
Wise words.
best interest at heart. And I just have to do what I can do and see how it turns out. And there's a story, they used to tell a lot of stories when I was new, and there's this one, and there's this little boy, and he's walking on the beach, and he's flying a kite. And this man says, "What are you doing, little boy? What are you doing?" He said, "I'm flying my kite." And the man says, "But how do you know your kite's there? It's up in the clouds. You can't see it." And the little boy says, "But I can feel the tug on the string." See, I can't see my higher power, but I can see the effects of it, just like the wind. I could see the leaves blowing. I could feel it. When I go to call somebody, like some of my friends in this meeting, and I put the numbers in my phone, I don't question that I'm going to connect to them. When I put the code in to come to this meeting, and I knew the right code, I didn't question that it's going to say, "Nope, you can't come in, it's invalid." If I flip a light switch, unless the bulb's burned out, I don't question that the power's going to come on. And that's kind of how I think about my higher power. I don't question it anymore. Because see, where God guides, God provides, and I ask God for strength, and God gives me difficulties to overcome to make me stronger. And I had a lot of yets that didn't happen to me when I was drinking. Like I told you, I didn't go to jail or get a DUI or lose jobs. But I've had yets in sobriety. Not those yets. I've had yets that are different. Like I had a sponsor die when I was a year sober. And that was really hard because I really loved her dearly. And I still miss her, and I still try to live the way she taught me to. And then I had two other ones die, so I had that yet. Or when my dad died, I hadn't had a parent die, but when mom died, I had that experience. And so there's lots of yets I get to have, and there's probably going to be a whole lot more that I'll experience. But I don't have to drink or think about drinking through them. So when I did the third step, I think it was the second or third day I met Lois, and I was sitting on her bed, and we were talking about the program, and we read the third step out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, holding her hand. And she told me I can create any higher power, and I could write what I wanted. And sometimes I'd write a list of something. And I remember I was new, and my friend Kay, who she ended up going back out at 7 years sober because she got a boyfriend that they went out to dinner, and he wasn't one of us. And he told her she could have a glass of wine, and she left us. But she wrote this list once because she wanted a boyfriend, right? And she wrote this list, and she tried talking me into writing one. I said, "No, I don't want it. I don't need a boyfriend now. I need to focus on my recovery." But she talked me into it. So just for fun, I wrote this list. And I mean, I showed my sponsor. You got to watch what you show your sponsor. My sponsor read my list, and she said, "Carol, you forgot a line." And I said, "What did I forget?" And she said, "Whenever you write a list, the last line should be, 'God, please edit the above list. I don't know what's best for me.'" Because I don't always know what's best for me. Some of the hardest stuff I've been through in sobriety is the best stuff for me. I got to share this morning at a meeting, and Glenn, I was thinking of you, and I shared about when I was sitting in Glenn's backyard, and he goes, "See those mountains in the distance?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Those are with Smoky Mountains or Blue Ridge Mountains." And he said, "That's what I drove over to get to him." And I will tell you, I didn't realize that I had the overdrive off on my car, on my van, but it was a tough drive. There were some really steep inclines, and there were some really steep downgrades down the mountain. And there were some hairpin turns and some wide turns. And sometimes I had to ride the brake, and sometimes the engine really strained going up that mountain. And that's what my journey through sobriety's been. Sometimes I've had really tough stuff, and sometimes God lets me coast. Sometimes I play tug of war with God, and sometimes God says, "You know what, Carol, you can have your way on this. It's okay. Your motive is good." And sometimes I fall face first in the mud, and sometimes I land on a pillow. And God gives me lessons and experiences to grow through. Where God guides, God provides, and I don't get stranded. And I haven't thought to drink through all this stuff I've been through. As a year sober, I told you my sponsor died. I had foot surgery, and I got through that sober. And it wasn't an easy surgery because my foot hurt and it throbbed really badly. And one day, God, this is how my higher power talks to me. God has not come down where I hear God's voice and God says, "Carol, this is it." God talks to me through all of you, through people, and keeping my eyes open. If I feel sorry for myself and I'm out somewhere, I'll see somebody that's in a wheelchair or something. And, this one day I was, I don't know, 2, 3 weeks post-op, and I had this wood shoe and I had crutches and my foot was throbbing and I didn't like it. And I told God I didn't like it and I was tired of hurting. And so I told my next door neighbor, and she said, let's get you out and we'll go to Target. And so she dropped me off in front of the store and she went to park the car. And I was telling God that I want to throw the crutches and the wood shoe through the window at Target, right? And what God did is he had a lady wheel out of the store in a wheelchair, and she wheeled over to the passenger side of her car, and she opened the door, sat on the seat, folded her wheelchair, put it behind her passenger seat. She lifted her legs and put them in the car, closed the door, slid across to the driver's seat, and drove away. And I said, okay, God, one day I'll be able to walk and go do all the stuff I want to do again. And, I've got spinal stuff and I've got all kinds of health stuff. And every now and then my foot hurts. And I don't take walking for granted. You see, when I called Lois, if I whined about anything, first thing she'd do is laugh. The second thing she'd do is, Carol, what are you grateful for? Or she'd say, pray about it. And then she'd say, Carol, stand up, take 2 steps and say, thank you, God, that I can walk, talk, and breathe at the same time, because she couldn't. She didn't let me be into self-pity, right? They say, pour me a drink. And there was a group in Fort Worth, and it was on the side of town where there was a lot of down and out drunks. And they had this platform, and then they had this toilet seat, not connected to anything. And on the lid, it had a frowny face, and there was a sign above it, and it said, pity pot, time limit, 5 minutes. And it had a seatbelt, and that was the longest they would let somebody be in self-pity. Because, see, that's not going to do me any good. So I did this 3rd step and said, okay, God, let's take this journey. And she said, step 3 says I make a decision, not a promise. And we don't hear it much, but they used to tell us, like, there's 3 frogs sitting on a log and 2 decide to jump. How many frogs are on the log? And I said 1. And after going through that many times, they said no. And it was 3. They didn't take action. They just made a decision. I have to take action. And she got me into action right away. I did that 3rd step, and then we did it like the big book. It says next, 4th step. It doesn't anywhere in my book say, wait till I feel like doing something. You don't have to rush. It doesn't say that in my book. It says next, at once. It uses words like continued. If I persist, it says, if I persist, remarkable things will happen. And so I just had that beginning. It says, just have a beginning of a higher power. And so I did. And I would say, God, you have to show me how you're here. Show me that you're working in my life. Let me know. And I would see little stuff. It wasn't big stuff. At 2 weeks without a drink, I wanted a drink. And so I was at a meeting when I wanted to drink, because I had some memories that came back that were really emotionally painful. And I thought, I got to drink because I don't want to feel this way. And you told me not to drink. And so I was ready to leave the building and go drink. And I had to walk by where the kitchen and the coffee pot was. And this guy named John stopped me, asked where I was going. I said, I'm going to go drink because I don't like feeling these things. And he said, no, he had 2.5 years and went out, and it's not better. Don't go out, Carol. Go talk to those women after the meeting. And I did, and I did not know I was doing a 5th step, which is telling those women those secrets of why I wanted to drink and why I felt the shame and what happened to me when I drank. And they shared with me. It's that promise that said, cling to the thought that the deepest, darkest secrets of my past are my greatest possession to avert death and misery for others, like those women did with me that day. Because when I would see those promises on the wall, and it said, I won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it, I wanted that so badly because of how I felt. I told you I couldn't look me in the mirror. Couldn't look people in the eye. I felt the shame and all that stuff because I did stuff when I drank, or stuff that happened when I was a kid. And that promise started coming true. The thought to drink won't come often is a 5th step promise. I can be alone at peace and ease, and I can look the world in the eye. That started to happen to me at 2 weeks without a drink. It's amazing. I got 9-step promises by doing a 5th step I didn't even know I was doing. So I did that 4th step, and my higher power kept showing me, I listened to cassette tapes, and there was a guy named David A. in Dallas, and I loved his recording, and I wore out that cassette tape because his mother said to him, if you turn your back on God, you're turning your back on AA, because they loved him when nobody else would. And he said, go to your, when you talk to people, learn to talk with them, not at them, to them, and for them. And so one Sunday when I went to my group, because Lois had me go to a meeting at 7 in the morning before I went to work. And that Sunday, I had to go to 3 different groups to get 3 meetings in back then, because our groups only had 1 meeting a day. And so my 7 o'clock morning meeting had a Sunday meeting at 11 a.m. And so I went one Sunday. I went every Sunday. But this one Sunday I went and I said, I just heard this tape of David A. And if he ever comes to Fort Worth, I want to hear him. And they pointed across the room and said he was our speaker that day. See, God kept showing up. When I had 9 months sober, the day I got my 9-month chip, David happened to be the speaker at our home group that night. He came over after and congratulated me and said, if I work it right, it's the last chip I'll ever get. And I said, I get one at a year. And he said, no, then you get medallions. So now I get medallions. And when I got my 1-year medallion, you know what? I was standing there and I was holding my 1-year medallion. And right after that, the guy got up and got a 2-year medallion. And he said, I thought my first year was the hardest, he said, but his second year was. And I remember standing there going, I don't want to go into 2. 1 was hard. I had a sponsor got me through everything really quick. We went through the steps the way it says in the book, and we did it quickly and thoroughly to the best of my ability at that time. And then God knew what I needed to hear, because the next person said, it's only as hard as you let it be. And that's been my experience. It's only as hard as I let it be. Am I going to fight it, or am I going to apply the program? In the Keys to the Kingdom, I love that story. I love the whole book. I don't know where I thought I had it marked. But anyway, it says something about that, allows for less expansion. It says, where I used to run from responsibility, I find myself attacking things with surprising vigor, applying the principles of this program. I still do the same stuff now that Lois taught me when I was new. I did that 4th step and I did the 5th step. And when I did the 5th step, I had no more secrets. I had no knot in my gut. I told Lois, life's boring. There's no chaos. There's no crisis in my life. And she said, do you know what that is? And I said, no. And she said, it's called serenity. When I had to take an action of something I didn't want to do, she said, how do you feel? And I said, it feels good. And she said, do you know what that is? And I said, no. And she said, it's called self-respect and self-esteem and dignity. See, by doing the things you taught me, I got things I didn't know I was going to get. I did that 5th step, and then I had that empty spot, and I said, God, I have an empty spot. Fill it like you want it filled, because I got rid of all those secrets. I got rid of all the stuff that made me feel bad about myself. And, about 20 years after, Lois said, keep my 4th step. And about 20 years later, and I don't know if it's 20 or 22 years. It was the end of 2012, and I had to sell my apartment and give things away because my doctor told me I wouldn't live long, and I didn't want anybody to find my 4th step. And I reread it, and I didn't even remember some of those things that colored my life. It felt like reading somebody else's life story, but it colored my life till I got to you and looked at it. And God always filled that empty spot with women in service, never a him. I had a husband who died, God used him to get me here, and we got back together when I was about 2.5 years sober. And we dated for a while. I thought it was the worst thing that happened when I got sober and God took him away, but it was the best thing because I focused on my recovery. They told me to put the effort into my recovery that I did into my drinking. And I did. And then I got to put him back in my life. And I said, if you ever make me choose between you and my recovery, I have to let you go. And at 7 years together again, I had to let him go because I didn't want to lose my sobriety. And he was doing things I couldn't be around because he wasn't one of us. And it was really hard. And, he ended up dying when I had 12 years sober. But we got to be friends again, and that's because I kept my head high with dignity and I didn't say anything nasty to him. because he didn't understand because he didn't have a program. He told me I was more fun when I was drinking. And so then I had to do my, and the formula Lois gave me is what I still do now. Every morning when I wake up, she told me I have to make conscious contact with a higher power, to do a third step in the morning, first thing when I open my eyes. And it's not just ask God to keep me sober anymore like it was. Sometimes it's what's in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but sometimes it's just, I say, God, just good morning, God. Thank you for another day. Let me do your will today. Please put in my path what you want me to have and be aware of it or who you want. It changes. It's similar to the third step prayer in the big book. And then I do a 7-step prayer. And my 7-step prayer used to be exactly like the big book. And then one day I realized, you know what, things aren't good or bad for me anymore. They're just lessons and experiences to grow through to share with you. So I just say, God, take all of me, give me back what you want me to have today. Because I don't know what's good or bad for me. I've learned that. And so I do that. And then, she had me read 68 to 71 and ask God, to help set my ideals. What kind of person do I want to be? How do I want to live my life? How do I want to interact with other people? How am I applying the traditions to my life? And that's my 6th and 7th step. And then I had to do 10 and 11 and it's 3 times a day minimum. 3 times a day I do all this. And it's continue to watch for these things as I go through my day. But when I wake up in the morning, it's okay, God. It says upon awakening, think about the 24 hours ahead. And if it's too much, I can break it down to an hour, a half hour, a minute, a breath, whatever I need. Now I can do 24 hours. Almost every day I can do 24 hours. And I can plan for other stuff, but I don't live in it. I don't get into the what ifs. And it says in step 10, as I'm going through the day, continue to watch for right selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And I don't get into those very much. And I'll tell you, I get into undecided and procrastinate and frustrated more often. And I can ask God to remove those. Because the solution to all the steps for me in my book of Alcoholics Anonymous is give it to God, ask God to remove it. If I hurt somebody, make an amend quickly. Turn my thought to helping you, call you, say what's going on in your life and not my life so God can work in mine. Because if I'm playing tug of war and holding on to my stuff, God can't work in it very well. And I find ways to be of service. I have a big book study. I go to a lot of online meetings. I look for speakers that share good recovery and I share their names because I like to hear solution. That's what I was taught. Lois taught me I don't dump stuff in meetings. That's for my sponsors and my support group, but I can share in a general way what a problem is. Like when I was new and I'd go to a meeting before work and somebody'd say, does anybody have a topic today? And I'd say fear because I have to face something at work and I'm scared. So how do y'all deal with fear? Right? Or how do you deal with, anger or whatever those things are? And you would share solution with me. And I bought a lot of cassette tapes. I didn't spend money on alcohol. So I bought cassette tapes and I was listening to step studies or the big book. And now we have all this technology and we had online meetings, but they were not pictures and sound. They were just lines of text and chat rooms that we had. I do Loners International still. That's what this is. It's like an AA pen pal club. Still do that 36 plus years later. I love our program. I had to make amends. That was interesting. There's one that really, I didn't like hearing I was a thief. I didn't think I was a thief. And then I heard people share some of the stuff you did, like take money out of your mom's wallet and take things you didn't pay for. And I realized I was a thief because I took money out of my mom's wallet and I took candy from the little gas station across the street and didn't always pay for it. And back then, candy was a penny and a nickel. Candy bar was a nickel. I didn't get an allowance. Sometimes I'd take money from my mom's purse and she didn't know it. We didn't have a lot of money. She probably thought she had some change and went and couldn't find it. How do I make amends for some of that? because it really bothered me. Right? So I heard somebody on a cassette one day, and they said they figured out how much money it was and added interest and donated anonymously. And I asked Lois, and she said, that's fine, I can do that. Some of the letters, I wrote letters for some amends. Some of them, she said, just leave people alone. I had credit card debt, so I went to the bank and I got a loan, and I paid off the credit cards, and I just had to pay the bank back. I had another one, just different ways to do amends. Some of them were just being different because it says my actions will speak louder than words. And they told me at the meeting, loving God expresses itself through me. So are my words, actions, and deeds reflecting that? And I try to be of service in whatever way. I wrote to GSO like she told me when I was in my first couple of months of sobriety, and I wrote to women in prison, and I wrote to people through Loners International, and still do, and did steps by mail. When people say I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, I wrote to people that they didn't have a sponsor, or maybe I was their sponsor, and we would write letters, and they did not have good mail service in some places. And writing to women in prison that didn't have meetings, and their only meeting was us writing to them, made me really grateful. I could take a shower in privacy when I wanted. I could get what I wanted to eat when I wanted to eat. It makes you really grateful. When I was 4 years sober, my cancer came back, and I had to have surgery, and it was pretty extensive, and I prayed a lot, and I shared at my meeting that I had to have surgery, and I was scared. I had surgery, in my 20s, and I went through 20 years of procedures, but I had to have major surgery again for cancer. And so I just shared that, and I'm laying on the stretcher outside the operating room, and I'm talking to the anesthesiologist, and I said, "You sound really familiar." And he took his cap and his mask off, and he leaned down and he said, "Glass House." And he heard I'm having surgery, and he got assigned to my case. And I said, "Can we invite God into the operating room?" Because I had a 99 to 1% chance I could have a reversible colon surgery for my colon rectal cancer. And we were holding hands saying the Serenity Prayer, and another doctor walks by and he goes, "Do you two know each other?" And Jim said, "Yes, we're both sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous." And I don't have time to tell you, but I got the 1% outcome, and I have a permanent ileostomy with a bag on the outside of my body since 1992 when I was 4 years sober. So that was 32 years ago, almost 33 years ago. But I've gotten to share with people, and I learned a lot through that experience. It's still unfolding, and it's my personal footprint story. So when I tell you I don't know what's good or bad for me, if God says, "Carol, you know what? Because I'm missing 7 internal parts of my body. I've got scar tissue tumors. I've got another one in my brain we found 4 years ago. And I've had brain surgery already. And you know what? If God says, "Carol, I'm going to put you back the way you were," but I would lose all the lessons and experiences I've had. And so would everybody else that I've touched or has been inspired by my journey, or I've helped because I share with people through a support group for that. I'd have to tell God no, because it's made me stronger. It's given me hope. It's shown me how big God is. When I was 2 months post-op, it was my birthday in September, and my friends, for my birthday or their birthday, we would always pick, we get to either be surprised or we get to pick what we want to do. And so this time my girlfriend said to me, "We're taking you on an adventure for the weekend." They didn't give me a choice. And we went to a bed and breakfast in a town called Waxahachie, Texas, which is pretty cool too. And they were talking about things, everybody's talking about stuff they're going to do for Halloween. And I said, "Oh, I can't do that. I just had surgery and I can't do anything." And so later on that morning, I was waiting in the lobby with my suitcase for my girlfriends to come down. And this lady comes over to me and she said, "You said you had surgery. Do you mind if I ask you what it was?" And I said, and we're standing face to face, looking each other in the eye. And I said, "I have an ileostomy. Do you know what that is?" And she said, "Yes, I have one too." And I started crying. And she'd had hers for 10 years and didn't feel comfortable. And I got to teach her what I learned through having this. I got to inform my doctor and educate him because he didn't know some of this stuff. I learned what the difference between theory and experience is through this. See, I had a nurse in the hospital and he had the book knowledge, but it wasn't working for me. So I told my doctor, and he said, go to this other hospital. This nurse has had one for 20 years. And by spending some time with her, I learned a lot, and it helped me to manage it well. And I've gotten to educate and share it with people and teach them. And that's why Alcoholics Anonymous works for me. You don't say, I think if you did this, then you could do that. You said, this is what I did, and this is what worked for me, and this is what I did, and this is what didn't work for me. And even our book of Alcoholics Anonymous gives us that. I remember sponsoring somebody and she had an affair and she was going to tell her husband all the details. And I showed her in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous where it doesn't recommend doing that. And that when they did it, this is what happened. And she did anyway. And the book was right. It caused irreversible damage to that marriage. So I read the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't just read it, I study it. And my book is magical because I keep seeing things I didn't see before in it. Words change and things appear. It says in there on the bottom, I think it's page 151. I like to sometimes just open my book, and early in this pandemic thing, and I was reading it, and it says, we make lifelong friends and we escape disaster together. How cool is that? You know, my sponsor that I have now, I've had 3 die. I had one from 1950. And you know what the older sponsors I've had, they keep it simple. They don't complicate it. They do it like the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Pray. Lois gave me so many prayers and I still use them. God, if it be your will, can I please not do things to hurt myself anymore? God, if it be your will, can I see this person or situation as you do? I read my book out loud in the singular because I remember what I read. And when I read silently, my mind wanders and I don't remember what I read. So I read out loud. I remember what I read. I hear it better. It's like how it works, you know, because you read it out loud and I hear somebody's voice when I have something happen. I go, oh, I've had a turning point. Oh, the result was nil until I let go. Absolutely. Half measures avail me nothing. And so this stuff sticks in my head. And after the ABCs of how it works, we stop. But the next pages are really important because it says, I am the actor and I want to set the stage and the play and the scenery. I don't want to do that anymore. It tells me what happens if I do it. And it tells me what happens when I don't do it, when I read that book. So I just stick to this deal and I try to apply the steps and traditions and concepts, and I keep learning, and I go to history meetings and I step out of my comfort zone. And this program works really well if I don't mess with it. I just do the best I can every day. I deal with chronic pain, and some days I wake up hurting, and you know what? I lay in bed and I wrap God around me like a blanket, and I just for comfort. And then I get up and start moving, and then I answer messages because a lot of people send me messages, and you know what happens? I talk to you, and then I'm better. My pain seems to be gone more. I get to be of service to God and all of you. And at the end of 2012, my doctor told me I wouldn't be alive for another year. So you know what I did? I sold my condo. I gave everything away, made my funeral arrangements, living in my camper van with some clothes I saved. And I have an apartment full of stuff again. See, I only have today. That's all I have. And I try to do the best I can just for today. I'm grateful for this way to live. I'm grateful for the higher power that loves me so much that keeps giving me things to grow through. And I'm grateful I have all of you to do it with. You know, I'm Jewish, I'm not Christian, but I remember at Glass House one year, somebody gave me a card and it was a Christmas tree, and under it had presents, and it had bows, and instead of name tags, it had things like faith and hope and trust and love. And when I used to go to my beach meeting, I'd sit in the sand and smooth it and write hope and faith and love and trust and serenity in the sand and just sit there and meditate. I'm grateful for this way to live. Glenn, thank you for inviting me. Thank you to my friends who walk this journey of recovery. It says we trudge, and trudge means just walk with purpose. Thank you.